Hey, it's Paul of Paul's Wanderings, and today we're going to talk about a decision that many of us have to make, and that is, should I continue with my hike or should I turn around? So for many hikers, when you're in the middle of a hike, sometimes have to make a decision, should I carry on with the hike or turn around and head back to the car? And for many hikers, that is a difficult decision. So when you're hiking, you sometimes have to decide, do I continue on with my hike or should I turn around and head back? And for many of us, it's a difficult decision. I don't know about you, but it takes a lot of time and effort to plan a hike. A lot of times you got to travel a far distance and it costs quite a bit of money. So having to end the hike before you reach that destination can be a difficult one, but one that many of us have had to make. Now, there are many reasons why you would have to end a hike early. Could be that you've gotten ill, you've had an injury. Those are the two that usually come to mind for most people. I know it does for me. It could be that you've had a piece of equipment fail. Your trekking poles may break. Could be that your pack is broken in some way. Another thing that could happen is that you've run out of daylight. The hike was more strenuous than you thought, took longer than you thought, and you ran out of daylight. That's another big way, or another reason that you might have to turn around. Whatever the reason for you having to turn around or make that decision, for me it comes down to safety. If I continue on with the hike, am I going to injure myself worse, or am I going to get myself so tired that I'm going to injure myself? So for me, it's all about safety. So when I sit there and I decide, should I carry on? For me, it's all about safety. I don't want to be the guy that has to get rescued. So that's kind of what I think about. Because I don't want to be rescued and I don't want to end a hike prematurely, I generally am one of those that will overpack. When I hike, I'll usually bring about 5 quarts, so over a gallon of water. We all know that water adds a lot of weight, and weight really can slow you down. But for me, I really like to have enough water. I have had to end 1 or 2 hikes early because I've run out of water. One hike, I didn't end early enough, and I had to walk 2 miles without any water it was in the middle of July, so needless to say it was rather hot and I was above tree line for a good 2 miles. So I've learned to appreciate the weight of the water. So that's one reason that I have had to end hikes early. I said earlier that another reason that you might need to turn around and end your hike early is because of an injury. On one of my hikes on the Falling Waters Trail in Franconia Notch, New Hampshire, I was going up one of the waterfalls. There's a side trail over the waterfall. I got to about the top and lost my footing and started to slide. I couldn't arrest my slide, and I fell, I think it was about 10 feet, and I hit the ground pretty well. Twisted my knee, so I had to decide, do I continue on for another, I think it would have been another 12 miles, or do I end the day early and hike back to the car for about 4 miles? I chose to turn around and head back to the car, and I'm glad I did. It took a couple days for me to recover from that fall. So that's generally in the back of my head. Do I carry on with this injury even if it's a small one? How can it turn into something bigger? So that's definitely something that's always in the back of my mind. Now, I've been pretty lucky on most of my hikes for not having any equipment fail. The one time that I did have an equipment failure, I was quite lucky. It was early on in the hike. I hadn't gone more than a half mile. I carry most of my water in a Camelback bladder in my pack. About halfway in, my back started to get really wet and couldn't figure out what was going on until I found out and figured out that my bladder had sprung a leak. Really didn't spring a leak, but the hose that connected to it that I drank out of came undone and was leaking in my pack. So I decided at that point, since everything within the pack, my pack and my back were all pretty well drenched, that it really wasn't safe to carry on. So kind of had to end that one. That wasn't a fun one. There are times where you'll start your hike and you're feeling really well. You got a good night's rest, you got a good breakfast, you had enough to drink, but somewhere in that hike, you start to feel not so well. At that point, a lot of times that's the hardest to figure out. Should you turn around? For many people, if you continue to hike, that you start to feel better. But I find if you're not feeling well, you're going to push yourself a little bit too hard and you're going to become prone to injury. So I like to say if you're not feeling well, it's better to turn around and head back. Even if you had to travel a long way, that summit or that waterfall or whatever you went to see is always going to be there. So it's better for you to turn around and not incur an injury. So that's something else that a lot of people run into. On today's hike, I hiked with a guy from work, and he brought his son. And his son wasn't feeling too well, and he kind of kept pushing on, and at one point I told him, the mountain's going to be there, it's raining, when we get to the summit you're not going to see anything anyway, so why push yourself? So he made the decision, which I definitely felt good for, to turn around and head back. I'd rather have him turn back and get back to the car and then feel better, as opposed to us to push on, at which point things get worse and then we have a worse situation on our hand. So again, anytime you start to feel not so well, I always feel it's better to turn around and head back to the car. You can always go back at a later date. I think for me the biggest concern that I have when I hike, and one of the reasons that I will turn around without a problem, is running out of time. Yes, I bring a headlamp and I'm prepared for that, but I really don't like the idea of hiking in the dark if I haven't planned for that. I have found for the hikes that I have planned for hiking in the dark, your trail, though you have hiked it many times, is a lot different at night than, say, in the daytime. A couple of the two hikes that I've done in the dark, started in the dark or ended in the dark. Lonesome Lake, I went up to, started on Lonesome Lake, did a night hike so that I could get some night skies. So on the way up, I started at dusk. On the way down, it was well after sunset, and there were a lot of rocks that I just don't ever recall seeing going up and down. So those are some things that you got to keep in mind, is how well are you prepared to hike in the dark? Because if you're not and you don't feel comfortable with it, then you have to have a solid turnaround time. Another instance where I hiked in the dark, I went out, I was planning on doing Mount Bond and West Bond, so I started at the Zealand parking lot, started about 4 in the morning, so well before sunrise. Again, trail looked nothing like it does in the daylight, and I have done that hike many times, so you have to be careful with that, and of course it's going to add more time to your hike, so you need to be aware of that. So not only do you have to be prepared for having your headlamp so you know where you're going, but you also want to be prepared for how the trail is going to look, because it's going to be very different than what you're used to. Now, one other thing that just came to mind while I was talking about hiking in the dark. The other thing you have to keep in mind is there are times when you might not quote-unquote lose the trail because you're on a trail. There are times where you miss an intersection and you take a left instead of a right, and so you keep going and going and going. There, the hard part is knowing when to stop and turn around. For me, I've had a couple instances of that, and that can be very scary when you realize that you don't know where you are. So in that case, what you want to do is you definitely want to stop, think, and retrace your footsteps. So that there, when you realize you don't quite know where you are, you definitely want to stop and head back. So those are some of the reasons that I have had to stop a hike and remind myself that I can always go back and do it at a later date. Even if you've had to travel a long distance or had to lay out a bunch of money to pay for a hotel or to drive there, I always like to think of it this way. Is it going to cost me more to come back, or is it going to cost me more to pay for a rescue and or a stay in the hospital? I am on the kind of pessimistic side, so for me that's what it comes down to. Which is the worst of the two evils, and I'll take the lesser of the two evils, which generally is turning around. So those are some things that you want to think about when you get to that point and you start thinking, should I turn around? Now I'd love to hear some instances where you've had to make that decision, should you turn around or continue? Or some of your hiking experiences where, say, you turned around because a situation arose where you should have, or more importantly, or more fun, I guess, a time when you didn't turn around but you found out later that you should have. So leave a comment so that we can carry on a conversation, swap some hiking stories. If you liked this video, again, remember to leave a thumbs up and leave a comment again for me, and share this video with family and friends that you think would like it. And of course, if you wanted to see more videos like this, or hiking trips that I do, or product reviews that I'm starting to work on, subscribe, hit the little bell so you can get a notification when I put out a new video. So this is Paul signing off.